Peabody Public Library, Columbia City, Indiana. It's July 17th, 2003. I am Janet Skank, the director of the Peabody Public Library, and we are interviewing Edward J. Meyers. Mr. Meyers, what branch of the service did you serve in?
I started out in what's called the Air Corps, and then it became the Air Force later on.
And what war did you serve in?
World War II.
And where did you serve?
Well, in the States, I took training in various states, Texas, Kansas, and back in Texas, Mississippi, and then I went overseas and landed in Africa, there for a short time, and then went into Italy and was there about a year.
Did you enlist during the war, or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
You enlisted. And why did you do that instead of waiting to be drafted?
Well, you're asking me to go back. I suppose what happened was I had a brother that was in the Navy when the war started. He was in the South Pacific. And he was a lieutenant commander on a destroyer. And that destroyer was lost in a battle of the Java Sea, and he was presumed missing and then was determined to be dead after several years. But anyway, at the time, I suppose I was disturbed, and I always wanted to fly. So here I thought maybe I'd get a chance to fly.
And how old were you then when you went into
18.
service? You were 18 years old. And where did you enlist at?
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
In Fort Wayne, and then they sent you on to Texas? Was that where you did
Yes.
your basic training?
Yes, we went to Fort Hays, Ohio, and then it was on a train, and we went to San Antonio, Texas for a classification center. And then pre-flight, and then I went to Pine Bluff, Arkansas for primary flight training. And then I went to Coffeyville, Kansas for basic flight training, and then to Mission, Texas for advanced flight training. And then that's where I got my wings, and that was in August of 1943.
So how long did that take you? You didn't establish what year you actually enlisted.
That was, I think, 9 months.
9 months to do that? They told you to fly in 9 months.
Yes.
Any particular experience or anything that happened at boot camp that stands out in your mind?
Not really. Boot camp is something that I think the infantry probably used the terminology.
So that was what a flyer, an aviator would have gone to.
What we did was, when we went to classification center, we were there and we learned some basic military procedures, like marching, but it was to classify us as to whether we were going to be pilots, bombardiers, navigators, or maybe not even be able to make it in the Air Corps.
And your final classification then was?
Pilot.
You were a pilot.
Yeah.
So after all that was finished, you went on to Africa?
Well, and then I had fighter training. I went to Thomasville, Georgia to start with, and flew P-39s. And then, in advanced training, I had flown P-40s. That was the Tomahawk. And then flew P-39s, which was the Air Cobra. And then I went to, maybe it was Mississippi or someplace, and flew P-47s called the Thunderbolt. Then I flew P-51s in Mississippi and in Florida. And then went overseas as a P-51 fighter pilot. when I got to Africa, I found out that my next orders were to go and join a squadron in Italy, which was called a photo reconnaissance squadron, and fly P-38s, which I'd never flown. So I went overseas with 2 or 3 other friends that I had graduated with, and the 3 of us went to Italy and joined this photo reconnaissance squadron.
No, there was, and I may ask questions that may seem naive to you, but I don't know anything about this. Was that a fighter?
The P-38 was a fighter.
Okay.
But the ones that the squadron that I went to, fighters have guns and carry bombs, and I was trained to do that. But I ended up in Naples, Italy, with P-38s that had cameras, and the mission of the photo reconnaissance aircraft is to take pictures of prospective war zones or current war zones where the fighting was then going on. We took pictures of, what it was is that intelligence would come in that there might be a battery of guns at a certain place, and then we'd get a map and go up and map that area and send it back down to intelligence, and then they would take it and make use of it. We photographed prospecting bomb sites. We photographed sites that had been bombed, and we worked closely with the infantry. Yeah.
How many people would normally be on the crew of the plane?
No, just the pilot.
Just the pilot on the plane?
It was a twin-engine fighter aircraft called the Lightning.
Okay. Did you ever, after that photograph, did you ever go into combat?
Well, that was combat.
Well, okay. Yeah, maybe I have my terminology wrong.
Well, they had practically every day you went up, there'd be flak, and then there were the possibility of fighters, the enemy fighters, coming up to. But I only had one incident involving an enemy fighter, and all you can do is turn tail and run if that happens, because you don't have any way to stay and fight.
I did see on your biography sheet that you received the Distinguished Flying Cross, and twice. Is that what the 2 after that means?
Yeah.
Could you tell us why you were awarded those?
As I remember it, I went up on a mission, and what you do is you have an area that you map. You go down and then you come back, and then you go down and then come back again, and you cover this area. And during that time, there was heavy flak, and my airplane was hit a number of times. And I finished that mission and came back, and somebody thought that was worth writing it up, and that's
People in, let's talk, if we can, people in your unit, did you get close with any of them?
Yes, I had a very good friend. We went overseas together, and after we came back here, he lived in California, and after we came back here, he came to Indiana and went to chiropractic training in Indianapolis, and then I saw him a couple of times while he was there, and then we corresponded and then lost contact with each other.
After Italy, other than the important job, the photo reconnaissance, did you do anything other service in Italy?
No. And then when I came back to the United States, we I went back into fighter P-51s, and we were thinking that we were going to go to South Pacific, but the war ended, or they must have known that it was about to end. We never moved out.
Mr. Meyers, were you married when you were in the service?
No,
But you had family here locally in Columbia City?
yes. My father and mother and sister.
So how did you keep in touch with them during the war?
Writing. Just that mail correspondence.
Your correspondence. How about the food when you were in the service?
Well,
The true fighters were fed better than everybody else?
I know, I don't suppose we were fed any better than anybody else in the Air Force, but it was a lot better than the infantry.
Okay.
And probably not as good as the Navy.
And not as good as Navy? Okay. How about supplies? Things, normal, everyday living things?
Well, that was provided.
Was all provided.
We never wanted really for anything. We moved around with the infantry several times during the time I was over there. We were billeted in, my last billet was a mansion that some count and countess, I think, lived in. But
In Italy?
the living was not hard. And just a few miles up, there were guys living in trenches.
While you were in Italy, I know there was a war on and you were very busy, but did you get to do any traveling or, I don't know how to use the word sightseeing, but investigate the culture?
I flew over Pisa, and saw the Leaning Tower. I went to Rome one time for 3 or 4 days, I forget, and saw the Colosseum. And I didn't go into the Vatican City, but saw where it was. But in 3 or 4 days, you didn't do very much.
Did you get leave very often?
No,
No?
that was the only time.
That was the only time you got leave, the whole time you were there. How about entertainment? Were there like USO tours and those sort of things?
There was a football game. I think it was at Florence. The Fifth Army played somebody, maybe another army, and we went there. Members of the squadron went there, and we watched that football game. There was a dramatic presentation the Barretts of Wimpole Street put on, and I assume that was by the USO arranged that. I think Brian Ahern was the male, might have been the male lead, and the female lead was a very well-known woman at the time, and I can't remember her name. I'm sorry, but she was very well-known.
That's okay. Anything about your service in Italy that stands out in your mind that you would want somebody to know about?
Well, I've often thought about that. I was only 19 when I went overseas. I remember the engineering officer, when I got off the airplane, asked me if I was the mascot, because I was very young looking. And as I say, I wanted to fly, and that's what I was doing, and I liked it, and was young enough to be dumb about things, and And then we became acquainted with a doctor who was in a MASH unit. And we went to visit him a couple of times. And he was working, he was operating, he was a brain surgeon. And I remember vividly going into the operating tent. It was just like you'd see on MASH. They had a large tent and many tables and doctors working. The thing that stands out in my mind and made me realize what war is all about was that there were GIs lying in the aisles waiting to be worked on. Some amputees, some unconscious. And there was a person who went along and every once in a while would slap the individual trying to get some reaction from him, see if he was alive. There was a tent outside full of injured waiting to come into the operating room. And then there was a tent that had dead soldiers in it. And that was something that I then realized, that this wasn't just fun and games. I might have had fun flying, but these guys were dying. So it was a somber and sober experience.
You said after that you came back to the United States, and before you were shipped out again, the war was ended or was about to end. Do you remember where you were when you got that word?
In Florida.
You were in Florida.
Yeah.
What kind of reaction was there?
Oh,
was the war in Europe over by then?
Yes.
The war in Europe was over by then.
Well, the reaction was elation, and we all figured we were going home. We had the choice of staying in if we wanted to, and I opted out and came back to Columbia City.
How long after that then did it take you to get back to Columbia City?
Well, as soon as the discharge papers came, I was discharged from Indianapolis.
What did you do after the war then?
Well, I came back here and was here a few months, and then the spring term started at IU, and I went to college.
Did you use any of the GI
No,
benefits?
every bit of it for as long as I was in school.
And what fields did you go into then, your career?
Well, I graduated with a BS as an undergraduate. Then I went on to law school down in Bloomington, graduated with a JD, a Doctor of Jurisprudence. And after that, I went with the law firm in Kendallville for a year and then came back to Columbia City.
And the GI Bill helped you all the way through even with your JD?
Yes, it did. I was down there a full 5 years, and somehow they paved the way.
Veterans organizations, did you participate in any of those?
I joined the American Legion. I did very little participation in it. I just didn't have time
Busy. Your military experience, did it influence what you thought about war? You did explain that seeing the wounded and dying had an effect on you, but just the military in general, your experience, did it affect your opinions on war in the military?
Well, I suppose I'm like a lot of veterans that it's such a waste of life and expensive. It seems to me there has to be a better way. I know that the Korean War came along shortly thereafter, and then Vietnam. thousands of young guys. And I I don't know why. I often wondered, what if we didn't go to war? What would happen?
Anything else that you want people to know about World War II?
I can't think of anything.
Well, we'd like to thank you then for your time, for your stories. The information is very valuable. And,
Well, you're welcome.